Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The crystal chandeliers of the Manila Hotel's grand ballroom cast shimmering reflections across hundreds of polished faces, each one representing the Philippines' most influential figures. Tonight's charity gala for underprivileged children had drawn politicians, business magnates and celebrities from across Southeast Asia. Among them, Manny Pacquiao moved with his characteristic humility, his presence commanding respect without demanding attention. Dressed in a simple black tuxedo that contrasted sharply with the ostentatious displays of wealth surrounding him, Manny navigated through clusters of conversations with genuine warmth. His weathered hands, once instruments of precision in the boxing ring, now gestured softly as he spoke with Bayani, a school principal from Mindanao, whose educational program would benefit from tonight's fundraising efforts. The evening had begun beautifully. Manny had personally greeted the waitstaff, many of whom recognized him from his days selling cigarettes on the streets of General Santos City. He remembered their struggles because they mirrored his own childhood, when hunger was a constant companion and dignity seemed like a luxury reserved for others. As the formal program commenced, Mayumi, the event coordinator, approached with nervous energy. She whispered about the evening's largest potential donor, a man whose contribution could fund 3 new schools in Sarangani province. The businessman had specifically requested a private moment with Manny, viewing the boxing legend's endorsement as invaluable for his expanding empire. The crowd gradually parted as the anticipated introduction took place near the auction stage. The businessman emerged from behind a gathering of admirers, his expensive suit adorned with gold accessories that gleamed under the ballroom lights. His confident stride and practiced smile spoke of countless similar encounters, where influence was traded like currency and reputations were carefully managed. Manny had heard whispers throughout the evening about this man's business practices. Stories circulated about displaced fishing communities, environmental violations covered up through political connections, and workers denied fair wages while corporate profits soared. The evidence wasn't hidden. Investigative journalists had documented the corruption extensively, but power had a way of silencing uncomfortable truths. The moment arrived with theatrical precision. Cameras from major news outlets positioned themselves strategically, anticipating the photograph that would grace tomorrow's business pages. The businessman extended his hand with practiced ease, his smile widening as he prepared to deliver what was surely a rehearsed speech about shared values and community development. But Manny's hands remained at his sides. The silence began as a whisper, barely noticeable amid the ambient conversation and clinking glasses. Then it spread like ripples across still water, conversation by conversation, until an unnatural quiet settled over the immediate vicinity. The businessman's outstretched hand hung suspended in the air, his confident expression gradually shifting to confusion, then discomfort. Manny's gaze never wavered. His eyes, which had stared down world champions in boxing rings across the globe, now held a different kind of intensity. There was no anger, no dramatic gesture, only the quiet strength of a man who understood that some bridges should never be built, some hands should never be shaken. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Teresa, a prominent socialite standing nearby, unconsciously held her breath. Isagani, representing a major television network, instinctively lowered his camera, sensing that this moment transcended mere documentation. Around them, the ballroom's ambient sounds seemed to fade. The orchestra's gentle melodies continued, but they felt distant, overshadowed by the profound weight of Manny's silent statement. His refusal wasn't born from arrogance or disrespect. It emerged from something deeper, something that connected him to every family whose livelihood had been sacrificed for corporate profit. The businessman's hand slowly withdrew, his practiced composure cracking like expensive veneer under pressure. The surrounding crowd watched in fascination and growing understanding, witnessing a moment when moral clarity superseded social convention. The weight of the moment pressed against the ballroom like a physical force, transforming the elegant gathering into something resembling a courtroom where silent testimony carried more power than any spoken word. Manny's unwavering stance had created an invisible boundary that separated truth from pretense, forcing everyone present to confront their own complicity in systems they had long chosen to ignore. Behind the businessman's carefully constructed facade, decades of unopposed influence began to crack. His empire had been built on handshakes exactly like the one Manny had just refused, transactions disguised as partnerships, exploitation masked as development, corruption hidden behind charitable donations. For the first time in years, someone had publicly acknowledged what everyone knew but dared not speak. Clarita, a respected journalist who had spent months investigating the businessman's operations, felt her pulse quicken as she witnessed this unprecedented moment. Her unpublished articles detailing environmental destruction and labor violations suddenly felt vindicated by Manny's simple act of moral courage. The boxing champion had accomplished with silence what her carefully researched exposés had struggled to achieve: undeniable public recognition of the truth. Manny's mind drifted to the fishing villages of Sarangani province, where families like his own had once cast nets into pristine waters that provided both sustenance and livelihood. Those same communities now struggled against industrial pollution and illegal mining operations that had poisoned their ancestral fishing grounds. The businessmen's companies had played central roles in this environmental devastation, hiding behind legal technicalities while entire ecosystems collapsed. The silence continued to expand, drawing in observers from across the ballroom. Renato, a prominent senator known for his environmental advocacy, stepped closer to witness what was unfolding. His own legislative battles against corporate corruption had been met with fierce resistance, but Manny's public stance provided validation that transcended political affiliation. Jericho, the businessman's personal assistant, shifted uncomfortably as he watched his employer's carefully planned evening disintegrate. The networking opportunities, photo sessions, and publicity arrangements that had taken weeks to orchestrate were crumbling in real time. The young man had grown increasingly troubled by his boss's business practices, but financial necessity had kept him silent until now, when Manny's example offered a different model of integrity. The businessman attempted to salvage the situation through forced casualness, turning to engage nearby guests as if the refused handshake had been merely a misunderstanding. But the damage was irreversible. Emil, a banking executive who had previously considered investment partnerships, found himself questioning associations he had taken for granted. The social proof that had once surrounded the businessman, the assumption that wealth automatically conferred respectability, had evaporated in an instant. Manny's thoughts returned to his childhood mentor, an elderly fisherman named Thomas, who had taught him that a man's character was measured not by his victories, but by the battles he chose to fight. The old man had possessed nothing but his dignity, yet he commanded more respect than any politician or business leader Manny had ever encountered. Those lessons, learned on the shores of General Santos City, now guided him through Manila's most exclusive social circles. Isadora, representing a major environmental foundation, recognized the historical significance of what she was witnessing. Corporate accountability had become increasingly elusive in the Philippines, with wealth and political connections providing almost complete immunity from consequences. Manny's refusal represented something far more powerful than celebrity activism. It was moral leadership from someone who had risen from poverty and understood the real cost of corruption. The businessman's retreat began subtly, his confident demeanor replaced by barely concealed frustration. His entourage sensed the shift, gradually creating distance between themselves and their now toxic leader. Marilu, a society photographer who had planned to capture the evening's most prestigious moments, lowered her camera and stepped back, instinctively understanding that some events transcended documentation. Around the ballroom, conversations resumed in hushed tones, but the evening's trajectory had fundamentally changed. Manny's silent protest had transformed a routine charity gala into a watershed moment where moral courage had publicly triumphed over expedient compromise. The ripple effects would extend far beyond this single evening, challenging everyone present to examine their own choices and allegiances. The businessman's forced smile had become a grotesque mask, stretching across features that betrayed growing desperation beneath the surface composure. His calculated retreat toward a group of political allies revealed the fragility of power built on fear rather than respect. Each step away from Manny carried the weight of public humiliation, a sensation entirely foreign to someone accustomed to deference and manufactured admiration. Manny remained motionless, his presence anchoring the room's attention like a lighthouse cutting through fog. The boxer's stillness contrasted sharply with the nervous energy rippling through the crowd, where whispered conversations carried undertones of revelation and recalibration. Years of carefully maintained social hierarchies were being questioned in real time, forcing attendees to confront uncomfortable truths about their own moral compromises. Enrico, a prominent businessman from Cebu, found himself studying Manny's face with newfound understanding. He had built his own fortune through ethically questionable land acquisitions, justifying his actions through economic development rhetoric, while indigenous communities lost their ancestral territories. Watching Manny's unwavering stance forced him to acknowledge the human cost of his business empire for the first time in decades. The ballroom's atmosphere had transformed from celebratory elegance into something resembling a religious revival, where silent testimony carried more power than any sermon. Ariel, a young entrepreneur who had idolized the corrupt businessman as a role model, felt his worldview shifting beneath his feet. The wealth and influence he had aspired to achieve suddenly appeared hollow, built on foundations of exploitation rather than genuine value creation. Manny's thoughts drifted to the children this charity gala was supposed to benefit, young faces that reminded him of his own desperate childhood in General Santos City. He remembered the gnawing hunger that made concentration impossible during school lessons, the humiliation of wearing torn clothes while classmates enjoyed privileges he could barely imagine. Those memories had shaped his understanding that true success meant lifting others up, not climbing over their broken dreams. Benilde, representing a major media conglomerate, recognized the seismic implications of what was unfolding. Her network had previously avoided investigating the businessman's operations due to advertising revenue and political pressure, but Manny's public stance made continued silence untenable. The boxing champion had accomplished what journalistic integrity should have achieved years earlier, forcing accountability into the light of public scrutiny. The corrupt businessman's associates began their own strategic withdrawals, sensing the shift in social dynamics that could impact their own reputations and business relationships. Carlo, a construction magnate who had profited from government contracts secured through the businessman's political connections, suddenly found urgent reasons to engage other guests across the ballroom. Self-preservation instincts kicked in as previously valuable associations became potential liabilities. Lourdes, an elderly philanthropist who had witnessed decades of Philippine social and political evolution, observed the moment with profound appreciation. She had seen countless attempts at reform fail due to institutional corruption and public apathy, but Manny's simple act of moral courage carried a different kind of power. His refusal transcended politics and social status, reaching into the fundamental human capacity for ethical choice. The charity auction that was supposed to be the evening's centerpiece had been forgotten as guests grappled with larger questions about complicity and conscience. Joaquin, the event's master of ceremonies, struggled to redirect attention back to the program's official agenda, while the real drama unfolded in the space between two men, one representing everything wrong with unchecked power, the other embodying the possibility of moral leadership. Manny's stance represented more than personal conviction. It symbolized the potential for ordinary people to resist extraordinary corruption. His journey from street vendor to world champion had never compromised his fundamental understanding of right and wrong, principles forged in poverty and tempered by success. The businessman's wealth and influence meant nothing compared to the moral authority earned through genuine struggle and authentic achievement. Estrella, a social worker who had spent years documenting the human impact of corporate corruption, felt tears welling in her eyes as she witnessed this unprecedented moment of public accountability. The communities she served, families displaced by illegal mining, fishermen poisoned by industrial waste, farmers cheated out of fair prices, had found an unexpected champion in the boxing legend who remembered where he came from. The businessman's retreat had created a vacuum of power that seemed to pull the entire ballroom's attention toward Manny's unwavering figure. His simple black tuxedo, modest compared to the opulent displays surrounding him, somehow commanded more respect than all the designer gowns and custom suits combined. The boxer's presence radiated an authenticity that exposed the superficiality of wealth-based hierarchies that had governed Philippine high society for generations. Aurora, a prominent socialite who had spent decades navigating Manila's elite circles, found herself questioning loyalties she had maintained without examination. Her charity work had always focused on prestigious causes that generated positive publicity rather than addressing systemic issues that required uncomfortable confrontations with powerful interests. Manny's moral courage forced her to acknowledge the difference between performative philanthropy and genuine social responsibility. The corrupt businessman had reached his inner circle of political allies, but their reception felt markedly cooler than usual. Andres, a senator whose environmental legislation had been consistently blocked by corporate lobbying, watched with satisfaction as public opinion shifted in real time. The businessman's influence had always operated through private channels and discreet transactions, but Manny's refusal had dragged hidden corruption into the unforgiving light of public scrutiny. Manny's mind wandered to his mother Dionysia, whose unwavering faith had sustained their family through years of crushing poverty. She had taught him that dignity could never be bought or sold, only preserved through consistent moral choices. Her lessons echoed in this moment, as he faced pressure to compromise principles for the sake of social convention and potential financial benefit to charitable causes. The ballroom's elegant atmosphere had transformed into something resembling a courtroom, where silent testimony carried more weight than eloquent speeches. Raphael, a young lawyer who had spent months building corruption cases against the businessman's companies, felt vindicated by this unexpected public validation. His legal briefs documenting environmental violations and labor abuses had been largely ignored by courts influenced by political pressure, but Manny's stance gave those efforts new credibility and momentum. Leticia, representing international development organizations, recognized the broader implications of what was unfolding. Foreign investment in the Philippines had often ignored local corruption in pursuit of profitable partnerships, but Manny's public stance created international visibility that could no longer be overlooked. The boxing champion's global reputation gave his moral positions a platform that transcended national boundaries and political jurisdictions. The charity auction items displayed around the ballroom, artwork, jewelry, vacation packages donated by the wealthy to benefit underprivileged children, suddenly seemed inadequate compared to the real value of moral leadership being demonstrated. Edgardo, an art collector who had donated a valuable painting, realized that Manny's example would inspire more genuine social change than any monetary contribution could achieve. Miguel, a construction worker who had somehow gained access to the exclusive event through his employment with the catering company, watched in amazement as someone from his own social background commanded the attention and respect of the country's most powerful figures. Manny's refusal to shake the businessman's hand represented every worker who had been cheated out of fair wages, every family displaced by illegal development projects, every community poisoned by industrial negligence. The businessman's confident demeanor had completely dissolved, replaced by barely concealed panic as he realized the irreversible nature of what had occurred. His carefully constructed public image, built through decades of charitable donations, political connections, and media manipulation, had crumbled in seconds. Roberto, his longtime public relations advisor, frantically calculated damage control strategies while understanding that some reputational wounds could never fully heal. Corazon, an elderly teacher who had dedicated her life to educating children in impoverished communities, felt profound gratitude toward Manny for using his platform to defend those without voices. Her students faced daily challenges created by systemic corruption, polluted water, inadequate schools, limited opportunities, but the boxing champion's moral stance offered hope that powerful figures could still choose integrity over expedience. The evening's transformation from routine charity gala to historic moment of moral reckoning continued to unfold, with each passing second cementing Manny's position as an unlikely but authentic voice for social justice and ethical leadership. The ripple effects of Manny's refusal continued spreading through the ballroom like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Each conversation, every sideways glance and nervous gesture contributed to a growing understanding that this evening would mark a turning point in Philippine social and political discourse. The boxer's silent stance had accomplished what years of investigative journalism and legislative hearings had failed to achieve: undeniable public recognition of systemic corruption. Dante, a prominent television host known for his political commentary, felt the weight of his own compromised integrity as he observed Manny's unwavering moral position. His show had consistently avoided topics that might alienate powerful sponsors, including detailed coverage of the businessman's environmental and labor violations. The boxing champion's courage exposed the cowardice that had characterized his own career, forcing uncomfortable self-reflection about the price of professional success. The businessman's humiliation had reached a critical threshold where retreat became the only viable option. His usual confidence, built on decades of unchallenged authority, had evaporated under the sustained weight of public disapproval. Inigo, his head of security, discreetly positioned himself near exit routes while monitoring the crowd for signs that the situation might escalate beyond social embarrassment into something more dangerous for his employer's reputation. Manny's thoughts returned to the boxing rings, where he had faced seemingly impossible odds against larger, stronger opponents. Victory had never come through compromising his fighting style to please crowds or promoters. It emerged from staying true to techniques, learned through years of disciplined training. The same principles applied here. Authentic strength came from consistency of character, not from adapting to external pressures. Leilani, a prominent environmental activist whose grassroots organization had documented the businessman's illegal mining operations, felt vindicated by this unexpected support from such an influential figure. Her community advocacy had been marginalized by mainstream media outlets, reluctant to challenge powerful corporate interests. But Manny's public stance gave environmental justice movements a credibility that transcended political affiliations. The charity auction that was supposed to be the evening's centerpiece had been completely overshadowed by moral drama playing out in real time. Noel, the event organizer who had spent months coordinating tonight's fundraising efforts, watched his carefully planned program dissolve while recognizing that the real value of the evening had shifted from monetary donations to moral leadership and social awareness. Gemma, representing international human rights organizations, understood the global implications of what was occurring. The Philippines' reputation regarding corporate accountability and environmental protection had been consistently questioned by foreign observers, but Manny's stance provided a powerful counter-narrative demonstrating that integrity still existed within influential circles. Leonardo, a young journalist who had been struggling to gain access to major news outlets for his corruption investigations, felt his phone buzzing with messages from editors who had previously ignored his work. Manny's refusal had transformed underground stories into mainstream news, creating opportunities for comprehensive reporting that had been suppressed through political and economic pressure. The businessman's associates continued their strategic withdrawals, each departure further isolating their leader while protecting their own interests. Crispin, a banking executive who had facilitated questionable loans secured through the businessman's political connections, found urgent reasons to engage other guests while mentally calculating the potential exposure of his own compromised dealings. Leonor, an elderly widow whose late husband had been a respected journalist killed for investigating government corruption, watched with tears streaming down her face as Manny honored the memory of all those who had paid ultimate prices for speaking truth to power. Her husband's death had seemed meaningless in the face of continuing systemic corruption, but the boxing champion's courage gave renewed meaning to all sacrifices made in pursuit of justice. The silence that had begun with Manny's refusal had evolved into something approaching reverence, as if the ballroom had become a sacred space where moral truth was being revealed through the simple act of principled resistance. The businessman's final attempt at damage control began with a forced laugh that echoed hollowly through the tense atmosphere, but the sound only served to highlight the awkwardness of his position. His entourage had thinned considerably as former allies found excuses to distance themselves from the unfolding catastrophe. Armando, his longtime financial advisor, shifted nervously while calculating the potential market impact of this public humiliation on their various business ventures and stock valuations. Manny's unwavering stance had transformed him into a living symbol of moral resistance, his physical stillness contrasting sharply with the emotional turbulence he had created throughout the ballroom. The boxer's weathered hands, scarred from years of training and competition, remained calmly at his sides. The same hands that had lifted world championship belts now lifted the spirits of everyone who had suffered under systemic corruption and felt powerless to resist. Victor, a prominent labor leader who had spent decades fighting for workers' rights against corporate exploitation, felt a surge of hope as he witnessed this unprecedented display of solidarity from such an influential figure. His union had been consistently undermined by the businessman's companies through illegal intimidation tactics and government collusion. But Manny's public stance provided validation that transcended traditional political and economic boundaries. The charity gala's original purpose, raising funds for underprivileged children, had been completely overshadowed by this real-time demonstration of moral courage that would benefit far more young people than any monetary donation could achieve. Salvacion, a social worker who dedicated her life to helping street children in Manila, recognized that Manny's example would inspire countless others to choose integrity over convenience in their own daily decisions. Elena, representing international development organizations, quickly began drafting mental reports about this unexpected turn of events that would reverberate through global anti-corruption networks. The Philippines had been consistently criticized for inadequate corporate accountability measures, but Manny's stance demonstrated that moral leadership could emerge from unexpected sources and create pressure for systemic change. The businessman's public relations team frantically attempted to redirect media attention toward the evening's charitable aspects, but their efforts felt increasingly desperate as reporters focused their cameras and attention on the ongoing standoff. Jaime, a veteran photographer who had covered decades of Philippine political and social events, instinctively understood that he was documenting a historic moment that would be referenced for years to come. Manny's thoughts drifted to his children, Jimuel, Michael, Princess Queen Elizabeth, and Israel, and the world he was helping to shape for their generation. His success in boxing had provided them with opportunities he never had as a child, but more importantly, his moral choices would teach them that true wealth came from maintaining principles under pressure rather than accumulating material possessions through compromised integrity. Violeta, an elderly nurse who had witnessed the devastating health impacts of industrial pollution in rural communities, felt profound gratitude toward Manny for using his platform to defend those without powerful advocates. Her patients had suffered from respiratory diseases and cancers linked to illegal mining operations, but their suffering had been consistently ignored by authorities influenced by corporate money and political pressure. The businessman's humiliation reached a crescendo as his closest associates began their own strategic repositioning, each departure further isolating him while protecting their respective interests from contamination. Ernesto, a construction magnate who had profited from government contracts secured through the businessman's political connections, suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere in the ballroom while mentally calculating the potential exposure of his own questionable dealings. Remedios, representing indigenous communities whose ancestral lands had been illegally seized for mining operations, watched with amazement as Manny defended their rights through his silent protest. Her people had been fighting legal battles for decades without success, but the boxing champion's moral authority gave their cause a visibility and credibility that legal arguments alone had failed to achieve. The businessman's final moments in the ballroom carried the weight of a public execution. Though no violence had occurred, only the exposure of truth that powerful men spend fortunes to conceal. His retreat toward the exit had become inevitable, but each step felt like a public confession of guilt that would haunt his reputation for years to come. Elmer, his chief legal counsel, maintained professional composure while mentally preparing for the legal storms that would inevitably follow this public relations catastrophe. Manny's silent protest had evolved beyond personal moral choice into a catalyst for collective awakening. The ballroom's elite guests found themselves confronting uncomfortable questions about their own complicity in systems they had previously accepted without examination. His unwavering stance served as a mirror reflecting the compromises each person had made in pursuit of social status, financial gain, or political influence. Ruben, a prominent banker whose institution had facilitated money laundering for the businessman's operations, felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the ballroom's air conditioning. The connections between his bank and illegal activities had been carefully hidden through complex financial instruments, but Manny's public stance created momentum for investigations that could expose decades of institutional corruption within the Philippine banking system. The charity auction items displayed around the ballroom, expensive artwork, luxury vacations, designer jewelry donated by the wealthy, seemed trivial compared to the moral leadership being demonstrated in real time. Sylvia, an art dealer who had organized many of these high society fundraisers, realized that Manny's example would inspire more genuine social change than any monetary contribution could achieve through traditional philanthropic channels. Daniel, representing labor unions that had been systematically undermined by the businessman's companies, watched with satisfaction as public opinion shifted dramatically against his longtime adversary. Years of legal battles over worker safety violations, wage theft, and illegal terminations had been consistently dismissed by courts influenced by political pressure, but Manny's stance provided validation that transcended judicial corruption. The businessman's humiliation had reached a point where continued presence in the ballroom became untenable. His usual confidence, built on decades of unchallenged authority and purchased influence, had completely dissolved under the sustained weight of moral judgment from someone whose integrity could not be questioned or bought. Rogelio, his head of public relations, discreetly signaled toward exit strategies while calculating damage control measures that seemed increasingly inadequate. Manny's thoughts returned to the street children of General Santos City, where his own journey had begun among garbage heaps and broken dreams. Those memories remained vivid despite his global success: the hunger that made concentration impossible, the cold concrete that served as a bed, the adults who exploited desperate children for profit. His refusal to shake the businessman's hand honored every child still trapped in cycles of poverty, perpetuated by systemic corruption. Felicidad, a teacher who had dedicated her career to educating children in impoverished communities, felt tears of gratitude as she witnessed Manny using his platform to defend those without voices. Her students faced daily challenges created by environmental pollution, inadequate infrastructure, and limited opportunities, all consequences of the businessman's profit-driven policies that prioritized corporate interests over human welfare. The silence that had begun with Manny's refusal had transformed into something approaching sacred reverence, as if the ballroom had become a church where moral truth was being revealed through the simple act of principled resistance. Alfredo, a veteran journalist who had covered Philippine politics for 30 years, recognized that he was witnessing a defining moment in the country's ongoing struggle between corruption and conscience. Herminia, representing international human rights organizations, quickly began documenting the evening's events for reports that would circulate through global anti-corruption networks. The Philippines' reputation regarding corporate accountability had been consistently questioned by foreign observers, but Manny's stance provided a powerful demonstration that moral leadership could emerge from unexpected sources and create irresistible pressure for systemic reform throughout Southeast Asian business and political communities. The businessman's departure from the ballroom carried the finality of a political exile, his entourage reduced to essential personnel who remained out of professional obligation rather than personal loyalty. Julian, his driver, waited outside with the armored sedan that had once symbolized power and prestige, but now felt more like an escape vehicle from public judgment. The evening that was supposed to enhance his reputation had become a watershed moment, exposing decades of carefully concealed corruption. Manny finally moved, his first gesture in minutes, a simple turn toward the charity auction display, where photographs of underprivileged children smiled hopefully from their frames. His quiet steps toward those images carried more power than any victory celebration he had ever experienced in boxing rings around the world. The children's faces reminded him why moral courage mattered more than social convenience or financial opportunity. Arturo, the event's head of security, watched with professional admiration as Manny had maintained perfect composure throughout the confrontation. Years of managing high-profile gatherings had taught him to recognize authentic leadership versus manufactured authority, and the boxing champion's moral stance represented something far more impressive than physical strength or celebrity status. It demonstrated character forged through genuine struggle and maintained through principled choices. The ballroom's atmosphere began shifting as guests processed what they had witnessed and contemplated its implications for their own lives and careers. Gloria, a prominent socialite whose charity work had always focused on prestigious causes rather than challenging systemic issues, felt compelled to reconsider her philanthropic priorities in light of Manny's example of authentic moral leadership. Hernando, representing agricultural cooperatives that had been consistently exploited by the businessman's companies through unfair pricing and illegal land acquisitions, felt vindicated by this unexpected support from such an influential figure. His farmers had suffered for decades, while their complaints were ignored by authorities influenced by corporate money, but Manny's stance provided hope that powerful voices could still choose justice over profit. The charity auction resumed with renewed energy, but the evening's focus had fundamentally changed from routine fundraising to something approaching a revival of social conscience. Jovita, the foundation's director, realized that Manny's moral demonstration would inspire more genuine social change than any monetary contribution could achieve through traditional charitable channels. Manny's thoughts returned to his wife Jinky and their children waiting at home, unaware that their father had just participated in a moment that would be remembered as a turning point in Philippine social and political discourse. His boxing victories had brought glory to his family and country, but this quiet act of moral courage would teach his children lessons about integrity that transcended any championship belt or financial success. Socorro, an elderly widow whose late husband had been a labor organizer, killed for challenging corporate exploitation, approached Manny with tears in her eyes and deep gratitude in her heart. Her husband's death had seemed meaningless in the face of continuing systemic corruption, but the boxing champion's courage gave renewed purpose to all sacrifices made in pursuit of justice and human dignity. The ripple effects of Manny's refusal would extend far beyond this single evening, inspiring investigations, legal challenges, and moral reckonings throughout Philippine business and political circles. Florencio, a young prosecutor who had been building corruption cases despite political pressure, felt his phone buzzing with messages from superiors who had previously shown little interest in pursuing justice against powerful corporate interests. As Manny quietly left the ballroom, his departure marked not an ending but a beginning, the start of countless conversations, decisions and actions inspired by witnessing authentic moral leadership in an age of compromise. The silence that had begun with his refusal to shake a corrupt hand would echo through Philippine society for years to come, reminding everyone that true power resided not in wealth or political connections, but in the simple choice to do what was right, regardless of personal cost. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.